Here's an experiment for you. Take passionate experts in human resource technology. Invite cross-industry experts from inside and outside HR. Mix in what's happening in people analytics today. Give them the technology to connect. Hit record. Pour their discussions into a beaker. Mix thoroughly. And voila, you get the HR Data Labs podcast, where we explore the impact of data and analytics to your business. We may get passionate and even irreverent, but count on each episode challenging and enhancing your understanding of the way people data can be used to solve real-world problems. Now, here's your host, David Turetsky.
Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I'm your host, David Turetsky. Like always, we try and find the brilliant minds inside and outside the world of human resources to talk to you about what's going on in HR technology, HR data, and HR analytics. Today, we have a very special podcast. We are broadcasting live from the HR Technology Conference, and we have with us the brilliant minds from Sapient Insights Group. Sapient Insights in the house! Woo-hoo! So instead of introducing all of them, I want them to introduce themselves, including you, Danielle. Yes. So Danielle, say hi.
Hi, Danielle White. I'm actually a partner with Sapient Insights through Collaborative Solutions. And very excited to be here today.
We're excited to have you. Susan.
Hey, y'all. I'm Susan Richards. I'm the CEO of Sapient Insights, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here today.
Outstanding. And before I get to our guest of honor, Dwight Brown from Turetsky Consulting, now salary.com.
Hey, good to be on again.
And good to have you. And so today we have with us Pam Jeffords. And before she gives us a little bit of background, I want to tell you, Pam Jeffords is the person to talk to when you're talking about diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. And we've had lots of wonderful conversations with Sapient Insights Group over the past, but when you talk to Pam, you get the passion. Pam, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great and still very passionate and excited. So thanks for having me.
Outstanding. That's great. So Pam, you're on the hot seat. What is the one thing that no one knows about you?
So I think because I'm a mom of 4 and most people have seen me driving the great minivans, the SUVs, they wouldn't know my very first car was a Mustang, a 1985 Mustang.
So for those of you who don't remember, Mustangs went through lots of generations, but this is the one when you were graduating high school, you wanted a Mustang because it was still cool. And it doesn't matter. It wasn't the 64 and a half or the 65. It wasn't a convertible, but it was fun, wasn't it?
It was still a Mustang. And I can still say, I drove a Mustang.
You can.
I had a Mustang.
You can.
My dad bought me a Mustang.
Oh.
What little girl doesn't want to say that?
Yeah, I know. That's really cool. Actually, everybody wants that car, even now. So we have a really fun discussion for you today, people. We're going to be talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And so what we want to try and do is talk about the past, present, and future. Why? Because it's really important to talk about context. So Pam, let's talk about the past. Let's talk about what happened in the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and belonging in the history. What did people used to do, companies, people? Where was this a long time ago?
Hey there, I'm Tim Boris, host of the Working Well podcast, where business strategy meets human sustainability. If you're an executive, a leader, or change maker ready to ditch burnout, build thriving teams, and drive real results, this is your next must listen. Tune in on the Work Defined Network or at timboris.com/podcast.
So I'm guessing you want me to expand past it just sucked and didn't work.
Actually, we can stop there and go on. That was actually really good. No, it would be good to get a little bit more, yeah.
And that might have been the recent past.
Yes,
That's not the distant past, is it?
That is actually the recent past, yes.
And so it's one of the reasons that you'll hear me avoid using the phrase best practice around diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. Because if there was a best practice, we wouldn't still be here. So let's be clear. One thing that the George Floyd murder showed us all is we were not doing enough. What we were doing wasn't working. It wasn't working for women. It wasn't working for people color. It was not working for sexual orientation, disabilities. No boats were rising.
Right.
And I think in the past, it was a well-intentioned approach that said, if we looked at it from a numerical standpoint, if we take the largest group of underrepresented people and we fix that largest group, statistically, we would be good, right? Well, the largest group of underrepresented people are women in leadership, right? So we knew we had women graduating college at greater rates. We knew they were in the workforce at the same rates as men. So it just made sense. And in fact, Warren Buffett said it's a tomorrow solution, right? So women were in the workforce at the rates we needed them to be. They were reaching right at that manager director level, and then it was stopping. So he's like, if I could figure out that gap between director to VP for women, that's a tomorrow solution. Compared to when we look at some of the barriers to race and ethnicity, it was actually before they even got in the workforce, right? There was barriers to education. There was socioeconomic barriers. And so we needed to address those for sure, but they were a little bit of a longer term solution, right? And so everybody said that makes total sense. So let's go and address that barrier. And then maybe all boats would rise. Well, as we know, it didn't work and no boats rose. There were many more women in leadership than when I started my career in the 80s. And certainly it did not benefit people of color or any other identity. So what if we flipped it? What if we actually looked at the smallest group of historically underrepresented individuals? And what if we took that group and eliminated the barriers, right? And then all boats would rise. So I think in the past, it was well-intentioned efforts, focused mostly on white women, assuming that if we took care of that group of people, that it would release the barriers for all. And in the end, it didn't work.
Can you tell me about the word opportunity and how not just people of color, not just white women, but all groups having the same opportunity as white men entering not just education, not just higher education, but also entering the workplace on the same platform in the past? Because we know, or we imagine, that there were barriers to entry for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Very, very real barriers. I mean, you're looking back at, just in the voting rights, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, when you look at it, wasn't too long ago, a little over 100 years ago, that women had the right to vote. And then you look at that and you said, we didn't really discuss it because intersectionality wasn't really something we understood, but it was white women's right to vote. And if you look back at that moment when they were deciding, there was actually discussions like, should Black men have the right to vote before white women? Or should we include women of color into this conversation? They're like, no, let's just start with white women. So 100 years ago was white women's right to vote. And then it slowly became, to where the other barriers to voting were addressed. But you look back and you're like, who would actually have that conversation today to say, well, no, let's start with white women. And it's just stunning, right?
But, and I know we're not getting to today yet, so I'm the moderator. I shouldn't go there. But today we actually are having those conversations around the opportunity to vote because of some of the laws, either the perception or the reality of some of the new laws in some of states, where the perception and potential reality is that voting rights are being narrowed because of restrictions on time and opportunity, as well as identity. Who you are, can you prove who you are, and all those things.
And can you take time off? I mean, It sounds like something silly that I never have to think about, do I have time to vote? Or do I have a home in which to have my ballot mailed to me? Or do I have parents? Because let's be clear, I have 3 kids now who can vote. Do you think they actually registered to vote? No, I registered for them, right? Not fraud, let's be clear. But I made sure they registered. I had them on, right? And so I made sure when we moved our house address that everybody's registration got moved, right? So now you take these, people that don't have those people who are taking care of that for them, like our parents did and like I did for my kids. So I think that, and it blends itself into, let's just take internships. I'm going totally off topic. Sorry, but it relates to
okay.
Like all of my kids got internships, right? Because I was like, you're going to be a freshman in college, you're going to get an internship. I made phone calls to my friends to say, do you have internships? And had my kids apply to get the internships. Well, when I talked to a lot of these first generation college students and people of color in these universities that are getting these amazing degrees, and I said, great, what's your internship? They're like, oh, no, I'm working at Jimmy John's or I'm working here. Yeah. And I said, oh my gosh, where are your
Wait a
parents,
minute.
right? Why aren't you getting internships?
Why did we let that happen?
Exactly. And so it's because their parents didn't understand that they should be getting an internship.
But
right?
so many parents didn't go to college.
Right.
And they did. I mean,
Yes.
they didn't know.
Right.
They depended on whatever was available at the university
Right.
or at the school that their child was going to. So those it's like the first generation of college graduates. Those parents didn't know. I mean, my parents didn't know to direct me to an internship.
Right. And let's be clear, I didn't have internships in college. So it's a double bind, right? Because they didn't have the college experience, but it has changed to where internships, so you have to be in the workplace now. And understanding there's internships out there that, by the way, are paying sometimes $25 and $30 an hour compared to Jimmy John's, which again, I love Jimmy John's, it's paying like 12 or 15, right? So
But one of the things, and now we can transition to the current situation,
if you want.
but I will lead you into that by saying there are some educational institutions, especially in the secondary ed, that are actually encouraging kids to get internships, not just in their senior year when they're checked out and they want to enjoy their summer, but even before, because in the Northeast, in Massachusetts, let's be blunt, in Massachusetts, they actually do tell kids to do that. Not that they do, because they want to have fun with their friends during the summertime, but they at least encourage that to set them up for having a better experience or resume for college.
Right. And so then, but here's again the other barrier. The majority of internships go to employee referrals.
Interesting.
Right. So you talk about it, and again, just a balance here is how cool is it that your employees want to refer their family and friends to your company?
Right.
Amazing, right? Employee engagement, they love it. And it's great to say I want my sister or my brother or my niece or nephew to work here, right? But what referrals do is they look exactly like you. So if you're looking to have diversity and you have this homogeneous workforce, you're going to get referrals in that tend to reflect. And so these kids that even if their colleges are telling them go get an internship, it's still about who you know. It's still about having that connection, that open door to get that internship. And so we did an exercise because a lot of early in career, because we can't say young, but maybe we can on this podcast.
Anything you'd like.
Thank you. Well, I've been told I'm the early in career people, but I'm doing air quotes young, right? They're very, yes.
I mean, I can't call them kids anymore.
You can't call them kids anymore. That's fine. But they're very upset with us, rightfully so, that we don't have the diversity, right? And so they're like, where is the diversity? And so I did an exercise with a group of early in career folks. They're all standing and they're very angry with their leadership. Where's the diversity? I'm like, great. So did you realize that the majority of our hires come from employee referrals? How many of you in this room came by way of employee referrals? And almost all of them raised their hand, said, that's why we don't have diversity, right? Because we do rely heavily on employee referrals, and we're referring people that look like us.
Yeah.
So if we want to do this differently, go outside of your network, right? Seek out people and refer them in, and that's the only way we're going to have diversity. So,
and I think that really speaks to where we're going to get the leaders of the future. Because if you're finding those people and you're bringing them in, people say, "Hey, these young folks, they understand stuff. They're not stupid, and let's bring them in. And we like this experience. It's kind of cool. We're learning new things about culture. Bring them in."
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking subscribe. This podcast is made possible by Salary.com. Now, back to the show.
So let's talk about the current situation in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and talk about how all those things are coming together in the situation we're in today, whether we're talking about compliance, whether we're talking about technology, whether we're talking about data. How does that resonate around today?
yeah. So one of the reasons we're all here in force at the tech conference is because technology is a disruptor of trends, right? And if there's one trend that needs to be disrupted, it's the stagnant diversity metrics, right? We're just not making progress. And so if you look at what technology has to offer us in the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, all four, and I tend to separate them apart, right? Is diversity we've always kind of have a handle on. most companies know what their representation is, right? So if you think of the D, it's just a fact. What's your metrics? Now, where technology is bringing us is understanding what your diversity is globally, because we've always known diversity in the U.S. But as you try to understand what your representation was outside of the U.S., it got harder because of the laws restricting your HRIS from capturing that. Well, now with things like virtual focus groups, where you can get 1,000 people on a platform at the same time, and you can ask them demographic questions about themselves. You just can't store it back in your HRIS, but you can ask them. So for the first time, companies are understanding the demographics of their workforce globally. And now I ask them their demographics. Maybe I ask them 10 questions. I ask nationality, sexual orientation, gender identification, and then I ask them, are you receiving frequent and valuable feedback? So seems like it's seemingly nothing to do with
that
diversity.
Seems like a very innocuous
question, right? But now I can and so now I can actually tell you who's receiving feedback. Is it your majority employees? Is it your historically underrepresented? Is there any differences in age? And I can tell you, I don't know all the workforces that are on the phone, but I can tell you that you're likely going to find people over 40 not getting feedback. You're going to find people of color in the United States not getting feedback. You're going to find that women are getting very frequent feedback, but it's not very valuable and actionable, right? You're going to find men getting very valuable and actionable feedback, but not very frequent. So all of a sudden, again, all I'm asking is a few questions. How often are you getting feedback? Is it valuable and actionable? And I can start to see the gaps across those demographic groups. And then I can start to say, let me close the gaps. Because when you talk about equity and opportunity, it's giving everybody, equal access. And so what we find is definitely feedback is probably the number one thing where we see the biggest gaps in who's getting it. Yeah. And also guidance around your career. So we know that, I started again my workforce in the late 80s, and everything was a very paternal. They're going to take care of my career. I had a management training track. They're going to take care of my retirement with a pension plan. They were going to take care of my health benefits. And then we shifted that over time to remove the accountability for all three of those over to the employee. But we didn't really enable them. And especially, we're starting to enable them around healthcare without a doubt. With all from a healthcare and a retirement with 401k, we've started to enable them. The one we still haven't figured out is the career. So we've pushed the accountability to your career. You can do anything you want to do, be anything, right? But we didn't give them the tools because what our research is showing is that most companies are not prioritizing internal mobility and career frameworks and job architectures. So if I don't know how to navigate my career, then it means that I have to rely on my internal network to help me and say, and David, you saying, hey, Pam, did you see that job? You should post for that. Well, if I'm not connected to 1,000 people in my company, nobody's telling me about that job or that opening or that opportunity.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about the feedback component of things, because it's one of those things that is so key in being able to progress in a career track. And like you said, number one is you still have to have a plan for a career track, which I hear from you is sadly lacking. But along with that, you have to have that feedback component to continue to build the skills and to address weaknesses, build strengths, and those sorts of things.
We all need it.
And I think there's a generational gap there. So with so many generations being in the workforce at the same time, those of us who are leading organizations or leading divisions within organizations who have been there, done that. We might be Gen X, we might be baby boomers, we might be part of the greatest generation. It's not natural for us to ask for or to provide feedback other than in that box of once a year or twice a year. And quite often what I'm seeing with clients that we're working with who are trying to change that dynamic is there's this just built-in resistance with our millennials and now our Gen Zs who are coming along and who are not just asking for feedback, but they're demanding the feedback. And we as leaders in those more mature generations, we never learned.
Later in career.
Later in career, yes. Later in
Loving
career.
Get with the program,
Thank you.
too.
Loving the
Get with the program.
Pam teaches me something new.
No
every
attorneys are
day.
going to get us on this podcast.
We didn't learn how to provide feedback. We didn't learn how to ask for feedback, and sometimes there's this built-in resistance to those who ask for feedback. So just building that awareness that there is a criticality for feedback is, I think that's a step in the right direction.
Right.
Look at the mechanisms, though, that are set up for feedback.
Feedback is not a one-size-fits-all phenomenon, right? Whether it's the generations wondering how do they get the phenom that's meaning or the feedback that's meaningful to them, right? And I like the concept of actionable feedback, right?
Right.
There's tons of women, especially, who get feedback. What do you do with it, right? You did a great job or better job next time, right? The step in between it, but the newer at work generation, right? They're looking for something different, whether it's the timeliness of it or the accuracy of it or the relevance of it. And so it's hard for organizations that have those in 3-4 generations, right? Working in the workforce, you can no longer take a one-size-fits-all approach.
No.
Right.
So I know you guys know Marcus Buckingham, who's part of ADP now, and he espouses immediate and constant feedback. And the tools he set up are check-ins every week, and if you've ever been a part of check-ins every week, they become a check-the-box approach every week where you just say how you feel. You don't mean it, but you have to do it because it's a compliance issue.
Right.
now.
It becomes a compliance exercise.
Right. And so there's got to be a happy medium here where you're getting valuable feedback that is actionable, that feeds into what you need personally. And that manager needs to get trained or needs to be a better manager about what it is that you need uniquely, not just me, the manager. And this gets me to another question that I had, which is the structures that we built. And you talked about job frameworks before. Tell me how job frameworks like job architectures with descriptions and the things that you see in a listing in a job ad versus the things I expect you to do. And this is the feedback you're getting on them. What are you doing? What are you supposed to be doing? Where is the gap? There is major problems with making sure all those things fit together and that you even understand what job description you have today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's so much to unpack there. And I know saying job architectures and career frameworks isn't a sexy solution to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging because everybody's looking for that nice big, but also a marketing campaign. We're going to be at 30% by 2030, and everything has to rhyme, and there's going to be a number.
Put it in a package.
We're going to put a package, and let's do a branding around it. And then I say, well, what's your job architecture look like? And they're like, what does that have to do with my DE&I? I just want to do some cool advisory council or something. So, but the issue with job architectures so much, right, is I can't tell you if you have equity in how people move around your organization if I can't tell how people move around your organization. So when companies are looking to see, well, Pam, I'm not sure if I have a problem, but let's go look, whether it's pay equity, whether it's promotion rates, or if you don't have an actual job architecture, how can I tell you if you're paying people fairly?
You can't.
Or you can't.
It's impossible to navigate.
It's impossible to navigate. So you're having to rely on your gut instinct. So on anecdotes and and hypothesis. And we as a human being, we don't act on those. I don't care what it is, right? And so we had a client once who said, Pam, I think that we're promoting our men when they have potential, and we're promoting our women only when they have the experience. And right. And so we've heard that forever. Right. Yeah. So it's not like it's a new thing. Right. But he brings that and we're like, OK, great. Well, let's go look. And sure enough, what you find is indeed the men were getting promoted based on potential. And you could see that there were some things that they had in common, like they were people managers. They had, client facing roles. There were like 2 or 3 common things that they had to have before they were promoted. And indeed, your women had to have like all 5. Right. And they were on average in their role 5 to 7 years before they got promoted, whereas men were only in their role, 2 to 3 before they were getting promoted. And we could show them, you're right, men were being promoted very quickly based on potential. Women had to actually demonstrate the job. So we bring this in, and people of color, by the way. So we bring this in, and we're not super excited about this because, again, they pretty much led us to it. And we're like, indeed. And I literally thought he was going to cry. he said, like, wait, what? You found it? And we're like, yes. The research tells you it's happening. You thought it was happening. We just put it on a piece of paper for you, not walking in super excited. And he was like, oh my gosh. So until people see it is happening in their organization to them at that moment, right? We don't take action. And then at that point,
So
he was
what
like,
happened?
go. He went. He was like, let's go, right? And so he took action because we don't take action. So I call it the Jennifer Lawrence effect. So do you guys know who Jennifer Lawrence is?
Oh, yeah.
So Jennifer Lawrence, Academy Award winner, all this. Every piece of data in the world would tell Jennifer Lawrence that she is being paid less than her male counterparts because of the gender gap, right? Every research says women actresses are paid less than men actors. So it wasn't until the Sony hacks when the person or people hacked into the Sony's database and they pulled out her salary and they sent it to her. Not only then was she aware that she was actually paid less, even though, again, every data point that she's had since she's been born. So then she sees that, I think the movie was
But
American
we don't want
Hustle.
to believe that.
We don't want to believe it. And nobody does. Right.
Yeah.
Men don't want to believe it. Women don't want to believe it. And so until she saw that her co-stars were being paid more than she was, even though she was the Academy Award winner.
Right.
And so, one of them was Bradley Cooper. And then I think it was Jeremy Renner, and so she decided, and by the way, several of them had the same manager. So it wasn't that she wasn't negotiating well, it was her manager was not negotiating
On her behalf.
on her behalf because there was some formula behind it. Yeah. There was all this reason. So what she did is say, I will no longer do a movie with anyone unless everyone shares their pay.
Yeah.
And some people opted out. So some people said, hey, not my problem. They're great. Some people said, I'm in. So Bradley Cooper's like, I'm in, I'll share my pay. So you have to have that transparency around it.
Right.
But until you have proof that it's happening to you in your organization, in your department, we just don't take action.
So that points back to the conversation we were having earlier today about pay equity and this concept of radical transparency in pay and how uncomfortable it is to have that happen and how cathartic it can be in an organization when it actually happens and you allow the organization to go through that and process it and come out on the other side of it. I think it pulls away that veil of secrecy that we have had for dozens of years.
It's a very generational thing, and it's a very U.S.-centric thing, right? Like generationally, we're all of the generation that you did not talk about your salary with anybody you worked with, right?
You could get fired for it.
You might tell your mom and dad, you might tell your spouse, but outside of that, you didn't tell anybody what you made, right? Today's generations do not operate that way. And this is the part that we have the conversation with clients all the time. Whether you are going down the path of pay transparency or not, your employees are going down the path of pay transparency.
They're talking about it whether
they
you
are
like it or
talking
not.
about it whether you want them to or not. We see it in the social media posts coming from companies all the time. Glassdoor,
But there is a concept in the U.S. of transparency. Look at municipal workers. Look at college institutions.
Absolutely.
Federal government. There is
The private
transparency.
sector is very different
Yep.
now.
I know, but it's not like it doesn't exist in the U.S.
It does exist.
You know what your sheriff is getting paid, right?
Right.
You know what your school teachers get paid, even though they're paid awfully, right?
Right.
Which is total
But if you
shanda,
think
as
about
my
that,
grandmother
we've
would
left
say.
it towards the ones that don't have the higher compensations, right? It's very much in the nonprofit, the public sector, the higher education realms, where their pay is not equity with, private companies anyway. And that's the ones that we've allowed to be open.
But you know what's hysterical? And I know we're totally getting away from where we are. We're supposed to be, but then look at CEOs, no offense, but look at CEO pay.
Oh,
look at the top 5 pay from a public company.
Yep.
And how uncomfortable should we really be with what's happening from an equity perspective when you see what the packages are? My 80-year-old father-in-law we're having coffee and we're talking, and he's like, how is it possible that this person could get this package and get paid this much walking away from a big company? I think it was him, who says, how does that guy get all these millions of dollars for walking away from a company, right? And that still exists, and it's public. We all know about it. It's part of all of these SEC documents.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that I don't love the gender pay gap reports, right? Because they talk about this, women make 80 cents on the dollar to men, but it's because we're not in those high paying roles that you described, right? So really the pay gap has become a proxy for women and people of color not represented in those big roles, right? And so, and I think let's be clear, that's a problem, right? But it's not equal pay for equal work, right? Which is what is the gap that you and I are doing the same job, but because I'm a woman and you're a man, we're getting paid different. And so I think it's more about those jobs, who's in them, and are they well represented, right? Because whether they deserve that big amount of money or not, we can discuss, but it's the majority of those big jobs are held by men. So that's typically the gap that we're seeing in equity. And let's be clear, we haven't made progress on that, right? So you look at the top CEOs of, you pick an industry, right? And it's one of those things where the oil and gas industry is constantly, telling the tech sector, right?
Yeah.
It's saying, hey, we just don't have the pipeline of women. And we don't have the pipeline of women, that's why we don't have women in our leadership. And so I always ask them, so if I were to show you an industry where it's predominantly women, then would you expect women to be more represented in leadership than men? And they're like, absolutely. Great. Universities and healthcare, right?
Yeah.
So universities, how many of us had women as our teachers, right? So women are the majority of teachers. Then you come up and they're faculty, but then they're less likely to get tenure. Men are more likely to get tenure. And then you look at the heads of the top 100 universities are almost all dominated by white men who are not the primary group of people in faculty. And so it's the same thing with healthcare, right? You've got nurses and doctors, very diverse, right? Then you get to the top heads of the hospital systems.
And they're always white.
They're also, except for, I think, Merck. You look at the pharma industry. And I believe he just retired there. He was a black man. So now, once he retires, I don't know that there'll be, many, if any, people of color that are leading large healthcare institutions, even though, again, the percentage and the representation of white men is not there until you get to. But we're sitting right here talking about human resources.
But then you see really strong CHROs like my friend Zoe Schweitzer from Jenny Splendid Ice Cream, who is a great example of a futuristic CHRO who really understands the pulse. And we've had her on the podcast, and she brings so much energy to the position. And it's a joy to talk to her. She should definitely do that. So now that we've set context for the past and the present, now let's talk about what is the future for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Where is it going to go? What can we expect? And do you think it could come soon?
I'm really excited about the future.
Yeah, I'm excited about the future. I think, we've gotten a lot out on the table in terms of conversation. I do think that from a technology standpoint, we now have access to the data we just simply didn't have before. So what we're able to do now from a data standpoint, it just wasn't possible before. It wasn't that it's just easy. It wasn't possible. Now it's possible. And so when a lot of companies talk about having a data-driven diversity, equity, inclusion strategy, right? But they didn't really know what that meant, right? It typically meant I have a hypothesis and then I go prove it with data.
Right.
As opposed to a true data-driven strategy means I'm going to look at all of these metrics across all dimensions of identity and across my entire workforce. And then I'm going to see where there's gaps. And when I see a gap, I'm going to go and look and see what's going on, right? And so I love it because then I get away from this whataboutism. Well, what about this group? What about this group? What about this group over here? What about this country? Let's just go look and see what our data is telling us. And if our data is telling us that we have gaps in experience, so again, looking at whether it's virtual focus groups or employee engagement surveys, if I have a gap in my focus group across a dimension of identity, I'm going to pause and go, what's going on there?
Yeah.
And I don't care where the gap is, right? It doesn't, if it's with white men, if it's with younger white men, if it's with older black men, whatever the category is, if I see a blip, I'm going to go, what's happening there? And then I'm going to go and look at what's going on.
But you mentioned, and this is really, really critical, the amount of data and all of those metrics means that you need to almost have, and we're talking about the future here, you need to have the robots looking through the data and trained on being able to find those blips, don't you?
Well, absolutely, but I think we're getting now. So if you think about a car, right, and so when I started driving again my Mustang in the '80s, right, we had a bit of a dashboard, right? It didn't tell you everything that was happening under the engine, but it did tell you, hey, let's light it up. So we need to first understand what should be on the dashboard. But then if you think about the other thing that happened is, the mirrors, like we had blind spots in the car. So, but we were trained on where those blind spots were. It was, look over to your left shoulder. Here's your blind spot. Your mirror, where's your blind spot? Adjust your mirrors. Well, technology came and has almost virtually eliminated all those blind spots. But we first had to identify them. And now I'm teaching my children to drive, and they're not taught about blind spots. Right? They're taught, look at the camera behind you. And for God's sake, they don't have to look. They can freaking drive with their eyes closed. Because all they have to do is listen for the beeps now, right? Everything's beeping at them, right? All 360 degrees. But then also the car starts to shake when you're crossing the line, right? Now, but you still have to make a decision because the car's going to shake, but you can say, no.
What are you going to do about that?
But you're still like, I do want to exit. So it's shaking. It's letting me know, hey, hold on. Right? That's that nudge. But I'm going to still exit. So I still have to have a human to say, okay, I'm going to exit, right? Yeah. But in the workplace, in the talent systems, we haven't yet identified all the blind spots. Or if we haven't told people from a transparent standpoint, where are the biases most likely to occur? And so once we do identify them, we both remind people that they're about to happen, and we remind them at the moment they're about to happen. And then we have technology that nudges going, hey, are you sure you want to make that promotion right now? Now, you might say, yeah, I do. But it might kind of nudge you and warn and say, hey, this is an out-of-cycle promotion. And did you realize that the last 10 out-of-cycle promotions all occurred to majority group individuals and all the other promotions for the rest of the groups are done in cycle? And you can still say, no, I still want to do it. But it nudged you to say, hey, here's what's happening. So I think that's where we're going to go. Nudges.
And everything you mentioned was a phenomenal example. Those are really good. The thing I always go back to, though, and again, we're talking about the future, is data must be perfect. Data has to be pristine underneath all those things. Because if there is any data that's not good, then you are going to get blips, but the blips are going to kind of distract you. Yeah. So it's like, in my car, I had a car that used to slow me down when it felt that I was too close to the car in front of me. But there were times when stuff would come up and hit that bumper, hit that sensor on the bumper, and it would slow me down while I'm going only 65 miles an hour, 65 miles an hour, and it would do that. So what I'm saying is that you're right. And again, we're talking about the future where data needs to be pristine.
Pristine enough to be directionally correct, right? Because again, we're not talking about an individual. So it's not about, is Dwight supposed to get promoted? Is Pam supposed to get promoted, right? It's if we're looking at it from an aggregate standpoint, are we directionally correct? And I think that's where most people are okay. We presented to a client the other day and we showed them, it was their path to client manager. So we do also, the future is, what are the roles of the future? So diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging programs need to focus the roles of the future, not the roles of the past. So I'm not going to, if a client says, hey, Pam, help me go figure out how to get more women on oil rigs, I'm going to go, no, right? Because that job stinks and nobody wants it anyway. So good luck, right? What are the jobs of the future? What are the, hydropower, solar jobs for the future? Let's go understand what's the diversity for those jobs. So first, pick the jobs of the future that are more likely to get promoted and more likely to be here in the future. Let's go attach our diversity strategy there and figure out what's going on. And so when we do that, it narrows down the pool a little bit. So now we're not talking about thousands of jobs. We're talking about, let's go look at these jobs. And then I was able to show them on their career path. You said client-facing roles are your highest paid roles. They're most likely to get promoted, and they're very critical to the organization. So let's figure out what the path is to there, and is there a barrier for your women and your people of color? And so what we found was there was a barrier for everyone. People weren't getting into those jobs. They were being promoted from outside. And so, and it was like, a few hundred. So we bring this to the executive team and they're looking at it and they're like, I said, you've got a career framework issue. across all of your identities. We just happened to pull it out because we could see that there were no women and people of color in those roles. And somebody started off by going, wait a second, I know that these 3 people were promoted into that role. And so they start down the path of accuracy and perfection. Yeah. And then somebody else, one of their peers, kind of touched them and said, is that really relevant out of the hundreds of jobs?
Exactly.
And he kind of said, you're right, it doesn't matter. So I think people are looking, is this directionally correct? Where are the barriers? Right. And once we uncover the barriers, you're going to uncover for everyone, right? It's going to be amazing once we can. But data and the ability to look at the data is going to help us again. Not because if we hadn't had the data, somebody would have assumed that there was a bias, that people don't want women in those client manager roles. Right. And the bias was actually, the process wasn't there for anyone.
Well, I think that's one of the great segues into the future of work in general, is that role of being able to read the data and understand the data and tell the story of the data is one of the key future of work roles in HR, right? Because you have to be able to understand the data. And it's kind of, you made the comment earlier, it's not about having a hypothesis and finding the data to support your hypothesis. It's actually understanding the data and generating the hypothesis and generating the story out of the data, right? So that you can actually make the changes that you need to make.
And that's a really critical point. Look at our HR organizations today. Do they have people who are set up to have success to be able to read that for themselves? No, but you can call Pam Jeffords and say, But you have to have that skill in HR.
Yeah, it is critical, and that's one of the things that we've been focused on for the last 5 to 10 years. Is how do we help our HR practitioners be better business people? So it's not let's be better HR people, let's be better people. Exactly. Let's be better business people. So let's use fabulous pieces of data that we have, interpret that, and use our human judgment. Because yes, we know that the data is not going to be 100% clean. Never is, never has been, never will be, doesn't matter how much we want it. How do we take our ability to reason and use judgment and apply that to helping our organizations further themselves and be better organizations and more profitable and add more to the common good.
Exactly. Well, this has been an incredible conversation. We could go on for hours. Yes. We actually just went on for 1 hour. Typically, the conversations are half an hour, but I have to tell you, this has been a phenomenal discussion. Great. And what I'd like to do is invite you back again. If you want, all 3 of you can join, but definitely invite you back again to do another podcast sometime in the future.
Perfect.
Okay.
Fabulous.
So thank you very much, Danielle, Susan, and Pam from Sapient Insights Group. That's Sapient Insights Group. And seriously, they are brilliant beyond just diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. They're a full-service HR and technology consultancy, and I have lots of friends there, including my friend Terry Zipper, who's not here.
Yay, Terry!
Yeah, we miss you, Terry. But thank you very much for joining us, Sapient Insights Group. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
We love it. And thank you very much, Dwight.
Thank you for letting me be on again.
My pleasure. And thank you for listening. And we will be podcasting from the HR Technology Conference many times over the next few days. So we hope you can join. And if you know somebody who would like to listen, please send this their way. Otherwise, thank you very much. Take care.
That was the
safe.
HR Data Labs podcast. If you liked the episode, please subscribe. And if you know anyone that might like to hear it, please send it their way. Thank you for joining us this week, and stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe.